So over the weekend, Vasyl Lomachenko successfully managed to move up to the lightweight division and dethrone the now former WBA lightweight world champion, as well as the Ring Magazine lightweight world champion, Jorge Nino de Oro Linares. Really good fight, really interesting fight. At least pretty much all the way through. It was an interesting fight by virtue of the fact that Linares was able to, I think, bring out a bit more of the more kind of textbook skill set of Vasyl Lomachenko. Lomachenko wasn't exactly having it all one way, the way he's pretty much tended to have it in most of his fights, frankly, since since Gary Russell, just about. It seems like he was fully in control of pretty much every fight since way back then. I guess you could maybe say, or even I might even say, like there were certain moments in the Miguel Mariaga fight where he got tagged a little bit, but even still, he never necessarily looked out of sorts. He was always kind of ahead in the fight. He only got hit pretty much against Mariaga when he started feeling himself a little bit too much, getting a little bit too cocky and fooling around. Paid for it, and then he got back on his grind, his proper grind, and managed to take Mariaga out eventually. But that said, I mean, this was also a fight where Linares wasn't necessarily coming with, I guess, an asterisk connected to him by virtue of having some kind of long, like extended layoff and or coming up in weight and or whatever other issues outside of the ring may have theoretically at least prevented people from giving Lomachenko full credit for some of the victories that he's had recently against Rigondeaux, against Mariaga, against Nicholas Walters, etc. But it was a good fight. Linares' speed started to give Lomachenko trouble, especially in the early goings. Linares, of course, managed to knock down Lomachenko in this fight. Although he didn't really capitalize on it, Lomachenko was able to take advantage of flaws that Linares has shown in the past. Linares has shown himself to be chinny in the past. He has shown himself to have a bit of an iffy stamina issue, an iffy gas tank in the past. And Lomachenko, was able to successfully, I think, take advantage of that, very much so. One of the things that stood out to me in this fight, though, however, was Lomachenko's jab. Lomachenko's jab was very much on point. He was very, very active with it, and ultimately, I think that's I think that kind of speaks to his ring IQ, his by virtue of the fact that he was using his jab so much against Linares. One of the adages that goes around in boxing is one of the ways that you can beat a guy that's very much a reflex-oriented fighter like Linares is, where he's just working off of just pure fast twitch speed, just pure explosive quickness. Is you stick a jab in their face. You give them something constantly to think about, so they're not just pretty much wading in with shots at all angles and doing whatever they want. That said, Linares was able to land a number of different shots on Lomachenko. That kind of little 45-degree uppercut that he likes to throw and step off to the side was landing relatively consistently, although Lomachenko was able to either partially or block it and or roll with it a number of times as well. Lomachenko's jab, I think, paid a lot of dividends, though, and also his body work a little bit too. I thought Linares' body work paid a lot of dividends for him too. Of course, he did knock down Lomachenko with just a straight right hand right on the face. That was really a beautifully timed right hand. Lomachenko just kind of, it's like he shot a punch, and then he like almost had that little, almost not unlike what happened with Manny Pacquiao against Juan Marquez. It's like he had that little slight degree of lag before the next shot was about to come, and he just got caught right in the middle of it. It's really unfortunate that Linares didn't capitalize on that, though, on the possibility of Lomachenko. I keep mixing up the names because they both start with an L. They didn't capitalize on that when he might have still been hurt, and score bigger in that round 6 when he knocked him down. And nor did he exactly managed to retime that shot. And see, that's one of the things that you have to recognize with Linares in the past, is that even though he has a lot of the athletic talent, he's very quick. He has a good bit of power on him. and just that the hand speed especially. His foot speed, it doesn't match his hand speed. He's not as quick on his feet as, for instance, Lomachenko is. Although the foot speed gap between the two, I don't think was as pronounced as one might think, simply because of the fact that Lomachenko ultimately did have to sell out a little bit in order to be able to get in punching range of Linares, whereas Linares could hit him at a longer distance just by virtue of Linares' greater height and greater reach. He has longer arms, so it's ultimately that speed was kind of canceled out to a degree by the reach advantage that Linares had just naturally inborn. But yeah, Lomachenko very successfully countered Linares' hand speed with that jab. It was really just a good fight, though. It was a tit-for-tat fight. Linares had won a couple of rounds. Lomachenko started coming back, won a few rounds. Then Linares dropped Lomachenko in the 6th. And then I pretty much had it going back and forth until finally in the 10th, when Lomachenko did manage to drop Linares with a body shot, and Linares basically, it looked like he kind of almost got Hopkins in there against De La Hoya, where it's like just the wind was knocked out of him. Because even though he did get up to his feet, he still looked like he was like, sucking in, like trying to suck in the air. He looked like the old Fabulous Breathe music video. Like he just like trying to suck in that wind, and so I guess the ref decided he wasn't ready to fight on, and he wound up stopping it right there. I would have liked to have seen it continue though. Just at the very least get a conclusive ending for it. Lomachenko probably would have stopped Linares, but at the same time, I mean, all you got to do is just look at the scorecards and see the fact that the fight was a draw going into that 10th round, to see that Linares definitely was not out of that fight. Both of their faces were scuffed up. They both took their lumps in this fight. And, I personally actually did agree with Robin Taylor, one of the judges, who had it 86-84. I actually had it the same score as that going into that 10th round. So basically I had it 5 rounds to 4 for Linares going into the 10th round with, of course, you get the extra point for the knockdown. So it's one of those things where, I get a reputation as like a bit of a Lomachenko hater, but all I'm doing is just being realistic about not only the guy's abilities, but also his achievements. It's just one of those things where I feel like people have hyperbolically, I think, placed him on a ranking that he didn't necessarily earn yet to get there. He has a lot of talent, sure, but it's almost like you could, in theory, somebody could look at like a recent fight that happened with Devin Haney, for instance, and say like, oh, Devin Haney dominated Mason Menard. Devin Haney's a pound for pounder. Like, well, based on what? Well, they could say like, oh, well, based on the eye test. Devin Haney, he was doing so many things in there. He was mimicking Roy Jones. He was mimicking Floyd Mayweather, and he was, beating a dude's ass who, just recently lost to one of the current champions, and Mason Menard. And it's one of those things where it's that to me that like people that were calling Lomachenko the pound for pound number one, and still are. It's as preposterous as calling Devin Haney pound for pound anything. Pound for pound top 10, top 15, top 20, whatever. He's not. He's just not. He hasn't earned that yet. He has a lot of talent. He might be there one day, just like Lomachenko might truly be a pound for pound number one day, a pound for pound top 3, top 5 one day. But as far as I'm concerned, he's basically fringe top 10. Maybe not even top 10. I haven't sat down and necessarily written out a list exactly, but I can name a number of fighters that I would place higher just by virtue of, they didn't duck anybody, like Lomachenko did duck Miguel Berchelt. And you can't say it wasn't a duck. He was his WBO mandatory. He ducked, and Francisco Vargas didn't. He gave him the opportunity, and he took it and won it. And then, I mean, shoot, even you could even criticize him to a degree after the Salido fight for not trying to get that rematch pop in sooner, and until Salido eventually finally lost to Miguel Roman. He was already getting close to the downside when they finally decided to start offering the guy anything, and it was still, pennies that they were trying to offer the guy. But, it's one of those things where now that's kind of in the past. You can't exactly make good on that past defeat at this point in time. I'm just like, Manny Pacquiao many years later, although Pacquiao's a more extreme example because it was many, many years later. Pretty much a decade later, by the time he really rose to the same level of prominence, where he can't avenge the losses to Rustico Torrecampo and Medgon Singsorat that he suffered way back when, or he couldn't anyway. Once he was starting to truly rise to that pound for pound prominence in the late 2000s that he did rise to. So it's one of those things where, from here on out, is what we can demand of Lomachenko in terms of being able to be deserving of even being in the discussion. Forget just saying number one, but just being in the discussion of pound for pounders. When you got a guy like Shisake Tsurungvisai who has back to back to back, I mean, shit, almost back to back to back to back fought top tier fighters. He has the controversial loss to Carlos Cuadras. He has the 2 wins over Roman Gonzalez, who at the time was the pound for pound number one. One of them by as emphatic a knockout as you'll get over a pound for pounder since Roy Jones versus Antonio Tarver and Glenn Johnson. And then, following that up with a defense against Juan Francisco Estrada, who's truly one of the premier technically skilled fighters of this era. Forget just of super flyweight, but of this era in totality. That's something to that's a hell of a record to compete with. That's a hell of a record to compete with. Now, if you're trying to compare him a bit more so to other peers like your Terrence Crawfords and your Mikey Garcias, he may look you can maybe look at him a little bit more favorably since Garcia and Crawford don't necessarily have high tier names per se on their records, other than say like an Orlando Salido and a Yuriorkis Gamboa, which are of course a few years removed. But you also have to kind of temper that with the fact that Crawford ultimately was it at a 140-pound division that was in flux at the time. I mean, not unlike where Lomachenko was able to kind of take advantage of some of the bandos that he got from the WBO, and didn't exactly take advantage of that. And even the featherweight division, when Lomachenko was a part of it, was in flux at the time. It was kind of barely settling down and getting its bearings together before Leo Santa Cruz won a title, and then Lomachenko moved up, and Oscar Valdez won a title. He won the vacant one that Lomachenko had vacated, and so on and so forth. It really just kind of depends on what happens here on out. They already have another return date for Lomachenko in August. I'd imagine they're probably going to try to have a reunification between him and WBO champ Ray Beltran. Although they're still keeping it open, I guess, that he might move back down to 130 and defend his belt there. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do. If he does go back to 130, I do think that there's plenty of opposition there for him. And even at 135, I think there's a few guys that could give him a pretty good fight. Some names that spring to mind, I'd still like to see him fight Burchelt. I wouldn't mind Gervonta Davis, if TMT is serious about tossing Davis in there. Alberto Machado, I think, deserves another shot at the big time, especially considering how the WBA has kind of screwed him over and pretty much handed his belt over to Gervonta Davis, which is absolute bullshit as far as I'm concerned. And of course, the winner of Robert Easter and Mikey Garcia is something that people should really demand, but I'm very doubtful of it happening, simply by virtue of the way that Top Rank works, the way that Bob Arum works, and the Arum's kind of mindset of trying to always get one over on his former employees and trying to never let his former employees get one over on him. So if Mikey Garcia was to defeat and upend the Lomachenko hype train, so to speak, he would not be very happy with it. I mean, to me, like that Lomachenko Rigondeaux fight was ultimately like Bob's last revenge against Rigondeaux, who he didn't particularly care for, especially after what happened with Rigo and Nonito Donaire, who was almost like a precursor to Lomachenko in a way. But I think that at the very least, this fight probably put the pump to the brakes a bit on the talks of Lomachenko fighting against Manny Pacquiao. If Pacquiao manages to get by Matisse, which I don't think is any. I don't think that's a given either. I do think that, considering the fact that Linares was able to pretty much run Lomachenko 50-50 for pretty much the whole fight, up until the stoppage anyway, and drop him, as a matter of fact, I think they're going to be a little bit more realistic of their expectations of Lomachenko, and I doubt he'll be fighting at welterweight anytime soon, even maybe light welterweight too. Ultimately, it may wind up being better for Lomachenko in terms of his sellability to a wider and more mainstream audience as well. But the way they promote him is the way they promote him, and it's hard to get around that fact. But pound for pound, no, he's not. He just isn't. It's kind of funny that people call him the Matrix, because it's almost like they've taken the blue pill of Lomachenko and pretty much subsided their mindset into an alternate reality where Lomachenko could do no wrong. He has 0 losses, and the Salido loss doesn't really count. It's crazy to me, but Yeah, I mean, good, solid win for Lomachenko. You know, he managed to duplicate the feat of the great Antonio DeMarco, so that makes him pound for pound now. You know, he took what was it, 9 rounds longer or 8 rounds longer than Yayo Thompson or the Juan Carlos Sagado, and 8 rounds longer than Yayo Thompson. But hey, there it is. But that's it for this one. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.